Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in Saudi Arabia. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, Joe, don't be telling me that Saudi Arabia have got problems, because I've seen that country. They've got a ton of oil and they are super wealthy. And you'd be right in terms of the oil supplies, because Saudi Arabia has the second largest reserves out of every country in the world. Only Venezuela has larger reserves, and obviously Venezuela is heavily impacted by sanctions, so it's not doing particularly well. Now, Saudi Arabia is also a major producer of oil. It's not just sitting on those reserves, it's doing things with them. And actually, it's the world's largest exporter, because the USA and Russia use quite a large percentage of the oil that they produce each day. Saudi Arabia is exporting the majority of theirs. But unfortunately, from Saudi Arabia's point of view, they're a little bit like those neighbours that you have that have a really nice house, drive really nice cars, send their kids to really nice schools, and all of a sudden one day you hear that they've gone bankrupt and you think, how can that possibly be the situation? But the reason for it is that they're overspending. And Saudi Arabia's problem right now is that they are super ambitious, and Saudi Arabia's ambitions revolve around a project called Vision 2030, which is basically the creation of a whole new economic zone that's going to attract in people from all over the world. And as part of this futuristic vision, they've had an idea to build a city called The Line, which is a 100-mile long city that's going to be in a straight line. It will be a triple-decker city, and it will be walled by mirrored walls, which all sounds entirely crazy and obviously extremely expensive to build in the middle of the desert. So in today's video, we'll have a look at the fantastic Vision 2030 plan that Saudi Arabia have put together. And this is like something out of a sci-fi movie. This is the sort of futuristic city that we all want to be living in around 10 years' time. We'll then talk about what's happening with oil and oil production in Saudi Arabia, because the majority of it is focused on the country's Aramco business, which previously was 100% state-owned and has now been listed. It's one of the biggest companies in the world that you can buy shares in. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary. So what I think is likely to happen with Saudi Arabia over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, and what this means for the global economy. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say once again, thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks recently, thank you for the time and effort that you've taken to do that. Really, really appreciate it. And if you're a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee membership or YouTube membership, thank you for that long-term support. It really helps to keep me going. It tells me that I'm on the right track, that I'm doing something right, that people are liking. And that support keeps me motivated and keeps me thinking up new ideas for videos. So thank you so much. As I mentioned at the start of today's video, Saudi Arabia has ambitious plans to develop a large area of its land called NEOM into one of the biggest cities and industrial centres in the whole of the world. So you're probably asking at this point, what is NEOM? Well, NEOM is a huge region of Saudi Arabia that's been earmarked for massive amounts of investment and development. And this project is like nothing else on earth. The rulers of Saudi Arabia have plans to make this the biggest development that has ever been envisaged. They want to attract in hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment to develop NEOM into being the place that everybody globally would like to live. This is an aspirational centre that's going to have cities that are created from nothing and developed up to 13% of the world trade. They'll also have lots of different forms of entertainment and pastimes and hobbies and even some skiing, which sounds absolutely crazy because it's in the middle of a desert. But by far the most ambitious out of all of the projects within this project is the city called The Line, which is a 100-mile long city that will be in a straight line, built over 3 stories and encased by mirrored walls. All of the developments in NEOM will be powered by renewable energy, and its location is estimated to be within 6 hours of 40% of the world population. Now, the futuristic idea behind the city called The Line is that cities in the past have been built in dysfunctional ways that don't really work. And the line is designed to transform all of this by putting 9 million residents into a 100-mile long line, which will have a footprint of around 24 square miles. The idea is that communities will be organised into 3 dimensions, with residents having access to all their daily needs within a 5-minute walk of their neighbourhood. And the plan is that the infrastructure will make it possible to travel end to end in 20 minutes, with no needs for cars, resulting in zero carbon emissions. Now obviously all of this looks extremely futuristic, and the city itself is designed to be 500 metres tall and housed within an elegant mirror glass facade. Now you may be asking about the climate at this point, because this thing is sitting in the middle of the desert. However, it will have a temperate microclimate with natural ventilation. And the energy and water supplies are designed to be 100% renewable. So all of that looks extremely exciting, but also extremely expensive. And the Saudi Arabian authorities have been looking to bring in foreign direct investment to fund a big portion of this. And this is one of the problems that Saudi Arabia is now facing. This map of the world shows the countries with the world's largest oil supplies, and the size of the country is proportionate to their oil reserves. So obviously Venezuela isn't the largest country in the world, but it does have the largest oil supplies. And as you can see from this, Saudi Arabia is the country with the second largest oil reserves, over 266 billion barrels, which is almost 100 billion barrels more than Canada, which comes in at number 3. Iran comes in at number 4, followed by Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Russia, Libya, and the USA is ranked as the country with the 10th largest reserves, with total reserves of around 37 billion barrels. Now, it's one thing to have large reserves, but it's what you do with them that counts. And this chart shows the countries with the largest oil production. Now, as I mentioned at the start of today's video, the USA and Russia actually use a large proportion of the oil that they're producing each day. And that means that Saudi Arabia is the world's largest exporter of oil. It's actually exporting the majority of the oil that it's pulling out of the ground. Saudi Arabia is one of the leading members of OPEC+, which is the consortium of oil-producing countries that come together and decide on how much oil that they want to produce in order to keep the price of oil at a level that they're all comfortable with. Now, obviously, from Saudi Arabia's point of view, there is a fine balancing act here, because when you're selling a product, there is an interesting mixture between the volume that you're selling and the price that you're selling it at. And what you don't want to do is sell large volumes at a low price, because that will reduce your revenue. But equally, if you cut back on your production in order to increase the price, there is a point when you're actually making less money, because even though the price goes up, if you're selling less of it, then your total revenue will go down. And that's one of the problems that Saudi Arabia is now suffering from. The IMF estimated that Saudi Arabia needs oil prices to be at $96.2 per barrel in order to break even. This chart shows the latest budgeted figures for some of the leading members of OPEC for 2024 and 2025 in terms of the price that they need to achieve for all of their oil sales. And if we focus in on Saudi Arabia, you can see that we've got 3 different coloured bar charts. The black chart shows the original budget for 2024, the pink bar shows the revised budget for 2024, and the yellow bar shows the budget for 2025. And what this shows is that the original budget for 2024 was a sales price of $79.7 per barrel. However, the revised figure is $96.2 per barrel, which is significantly above the average that oil has been trading at over the last 12 months. And the budget for 2025 is $84.7 per barrel. And this chart shows the movement in the price of Brent crude oil over the last 5 years. And if we look at that level of $96.2 per barrel, you can see that the only time that oil has been trading at that level was the period immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when we saw a huge spike in the oil price. It actually traded up above $100 per barrel for a prolonged period because of the uncertainty over global oil supplies. However, since the middle of 2022, when things started to calm down and the oil supplies started to stabilise, the price hasn't been above $96.2. So the budgeted level that Saudi Arabia have set looks highly ambitious. So what does all of this mean for the economy of Saudi Arabia? This chart shows Saudi Arabia's balance of trade for the last 5 years. The balance of trade is basically the difference between the value of all of your exports and the cost of all of your imports. And the scale on the right hand side of this chart is shown in Saudi Arabian riyals and goes from 0 at the bottom to 90 at the top. And in terms of the exchange rate, $1 equates to around 3.75 Saudi Arabian riyals. So the scale in dollars would be from 0 to 24 billion at the top. And not surprisingly, given the fact that Saudi Arabia is the world's largest exporter of oil, the balance of trade in the last 5 years has been predominantly in positive territory. The only time that it actually dipped below 0 was during the COVID pandemic, when obviously the demand for oil fell significantly, but only for a very short time. So Saudi Arabia has a huge amount of income coming in and spends significantly less on its imports. And so you might expect Saudi Arabia to have a huge current account, to be building up large amounts of capital. However, this chart shows the current account over the last 5 years, and the scale on the right-hand side of this chart is actually shown in billions of US dollars. And what this chart shows is that since the end of 2022, there's been a significant downward trend in terms of the current account. Saudi Arabia is spending large amounts of its reserves, and obviously where that money is going is onto these ambitious projects. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening in Saudi Arabia is really quite fascinating, because what we've got here is one of the richest countries in the world. It's sitting on the second largest oil reserves out of every country globally. And actually, when you look at the quality of the oil that Saudi Arabia is sitting on, there's an argument to say that it's actually the biggest reserves in terms of the highest grade oil, because some of the oil that Venezuela is sitting on is quite difficult to process. So we've got a country that has a huge wealth of natural reserves, and they've actually exploited it extremely well. They're the largest exporter globally. They're the number one player in the global export of oil. So all of that sounds fantastic and should mean that Saudi Arabia have no money worries whatsoever. But as I said right at the start of today's video, Saudi Arabia is like one of your very ambitious neighbours that's always looking to better themselves, to do something that's groundbreaking. And the NEOM project is certainly that. This would be the most futuristic city and development that's ever been seen anywhere on planet Earth. And when you come up with an idea to build a city that's 100 miles long and 3 stories high, that's surrounded in mirrored glass, that tells you that somebody isn't looking at the budget. That sounds extremely expensive to build anywhere. But then when you factor in on top of that, that this is being built in the desert and it's going to be entirely renewable and have sufficient water and air conditioning to keep everybody happy, you know that that's going to cost a hell of a lot of money. And that's exactly what we've got here. We've got an extremely expensive project that is now being financed. Now, when Saudi Arabia first announced this, they were intending to issue bonds to part finance, to get lots of foreign investment. But unfortunately, from their point of view, the level of foreign investment has been significantly lower than they originally expected. So what that's meant is that the Saudi government have had to fund a bigger proportion themselves. And that's one of the reasons why they're starting to see their cash balances dropping dramatically. But the other factor, as we've discussed in today's video, is what's going on in the oil markets, because just because you're the world's largest supplier of oil doesn't mean that you can set the price, because the oil markets are a true market. The price is set by supply and demand. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that oil prices have moved up and down. Immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we saw oil prices spike above $100 per barrel. And that was great news from Saudi Arabia's point of view, because they're the biggest exporter and therefore they were making super profits at that point. But as the world started to stabilise, and actually we started to see demand falling because there was a global slowdown towards the end of 2022, prices started falling. And Saudi Arabia, as the world's biggest earner from oil, didn't want that to happen. So they got together with the rest of OPEC Plus and decided that they were going to cut back on production to put the price back up to where they wanted it to go to. But unfortunately, you can't beat the market forever. So Saudi Arabia can't control the price over the long term, and as a result of all of this, they've had to announce cutbacks on their Vision 2030 plan. So it doesn't look like NEOM is going to open in 6 years' time, and we won't see the city called The Line opening within the next 5 or 6 years, certainly not with the level of people that were originally estimated to be living there. But it will be fascinating to see what happens with that Vision 2030 project, whether or not Saudi Arabia can get sufficient overseas interest in it, whether they can start raising bonds that will finance that development, or if they're going to have to step back and say, actually, because of what's happening in the oil markets and the price of oil, we don't think we're going to be able to fund that, and therefore we might have to put it on ice. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.